Today's assembly will include talks about several types of Christianity, and please note that Sunday Assembly is a non-religious community that strives to be inclusive of people without or with faith. Our intention with this assembly today is not to center one religion, but to see where our friends in the faith community overlap with our own for better mutual understanding. So that's the purpose of what we're doing today, and we're very excited to have Reverend Madison T. Shockley II with us today. We've watched him talk on YouTube, and he is fantastic. He's not here, and his head is not growing in front of me. With experience in religious, political, nonprofit, and media environments, our speaker today, Reverend Madison T. Shockley II, has been the pastor for the Pilgrim United Church of Christ in Carlsbad, California since 2004. He holds the master's in divinity from the Union Theological Seminary, where he also serves on the board of trustees. He has done advanced graduate work in First Testament studies at Claremont Graduate University, and he also serves on the board of the Board of Directors for Compassion and Choices. Madison also writes commentary for various online and print outlets, and Reverend Shockley will stay after to answer your questions. So please save your questions until then, and we're so excited to have him here. First time in Sunday Assembly history I'm saying this suffix. Welcome, Reverend Madison Shockley.
Thank you, Michelle, for that very generous introduction. And thank you all. Thank you, Laura. I think you were the first one to reach out to me and connect me to Sunday Assembly. And I want to say I have been aware of Sunday Assembly since its beginning. And in fact, let's see, that was 2011. This is 2022. Yeah. I was in London around the time that it started, and I had heard about it and thought, wow, that's a very interesting idea, and have been wanting to witness one. I didn't know that I'd be the principal speaker at the first one I attended. Thought I might attend one first, but c'est la vie. And I appreciate how challenging it can be for this community of non-religious, of atheist folk, to invite a speaker with the title of Reverend, the Reverend. But as I hope you'll understand by the time my talk is finished, that we're not as far apart as you might think. So let me start my timer so that I'll go over. And I actually do this at church. I take my iPhone in and time it. I don't always stop, but at least I know that I've gone over. I'm here as part of an effort that I am undergoing at this present moment. And that's why the invitation from Laura piqued my interest, because it came at the same time as I had another invitation to speak at a Unitarian church in Solana Beach. And I said, well, what's going on? Why these two very interesting invitations come at the same time? And so as I thought about that, I said there's something more than just an opportunity to share, but maybe there's something afoot that's trying to push these progressive communities closer together. And that's what I talked with the Unitarians about. Now, I'm a member of the United Church of Christ, and hi, pilgrims. They're allowing me to be here as part of an interfaith outreach, if you will, because I think that's what's going to be needed in the future for progressive communities. And so I shared with the Unitarians that very same thing. Now, we share a lot more history. The Unitarians and the UCC were at one point the same church, and we split a while back. Now, you all are a new birth, but I dare say that a good cross-section of you were at one time connected to a faith community. How many? Okay, that's the vast majority of you. And one of the things that Laura found interesting is that at Pilgrim United Church of Christ, about 21% of our congregation are atheist or agnostic, but they are members of our church. So, I did start my clock here. I want to review with you about 2,000 years of church history just in the next 10 minutes. And that'll give us some context for what I'm hoping to propose when we end. So, let's start at the beginning. In the year 4 of the Common Era, Jesus of Nazareth is born in Bethlehem, making him Jesus of Bethlehem, but actually in Nazareth. That's another talk. But he doesn't do much for about 20 years, 27 years. So when he's about 30 years old, he starts talking to people. And he's posturing as a philosopher. Maybe he was a rabbi. He was Jewish by all accounts. And he had a very brief teaching career. By some accounts, just 1 year, and by other accounts, maybe as much as 3 years. And during this time that he was active, Jesus teaches and preaches and heals and casts out demons. He does a lot of stuff in those 3 years. But there's one thing that he did not do. Jesus did not start a church. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. His movement, if you will, was a reform movement within the Judaism of its time that had a variety of expressions. So, the end of his career was a gruesome and brutal state execution carried out by the Roman Empire, who for some reason found his teaching and preaching and casting out demons and giving away healings for free a threat to the Roman Empire, so they executed him. Now, after his death, his followers began to form communities, congregations, to continue his teachings of radical inclusion and his preaching about an empire filled with misfits, outcasts, and nobodies. An upside-down empire where the first are last and the last are first. These communities and congregations are varied, unique, experimental, and dynamic. And they spread all over the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And they're unregulated. They're just popping up in these various places. However, so these congregations pop up and they spread around rather rapidly for the kind of end that the founder had. You wouldn't think people would be, sign me up for that. But they did. And so they start to grow for about 300 years. But they are deemed, just like their founder, dangerous to the Roman Empire. One of the reasons is cultural. You know, we're in what we call a culture war right now. Don't underestimate the power of a culture war. That's what got the Christians persecuted, because they were teaching that they should not maintain this hierarchical, patriarchal society, but they wanted to flip everything upside down, where slaves and emperors were equal. No, you can't have that. And so they were deemed dangerous to the Roman Empire, and they were persecuted brutally at times, and persecuted by emperors, you know, some harshly, some mildly, because emperors, if you read your Roman history, they come and go, you know, kind of like our leaders. But in the year 312, an unexpected thing happens. The emperor of the Roman Empire converts to Christianity. Why? Because he painted crosses on the shields of his soldiers before he went into battle, and he won the battle. So he believed in his mind that the Christian God, not Jupiter, not Saturn, not Mars, who was the war god of the Romans, the Christian God gave him a military victory. Now just let that sink in for a minute when you think about the person that founded the movement. But that's what Constantine thought, and that's what he believed. So he converts to Christianity, but he had ulterior motives, wanting to use Christianity as a unifying force for his diverse empire of different kingdoms with different gods and different religions. But even Christianity itself, in a way, had different gods and different religions. We often talk about Christianity, but one of the things that progressive Christian theologians are talking about are Christianities, not Christianity. There is no one and never has been one Christianity. Anyway, so Constantine decides to convene all of the bishops from the Roman Empire, some 300 bishops. He pays their way, he pays their stay, he provides them with food, and he locks them in his palace in a place called Nicaea by the sea until they can agree on a theological creed for this new faith. Slide 1, please. That's Constantine presiding over this Nicene Council. So, but this unifying creed was something they never had before. They were diverse and experimental and innovative. And so the main sticking point among all these bishops that were trying to hammer out a common creed was not whether we should love our enemies. It was not whether we should forgive each other so that we can continue in community with one another. But it was whether Jesus was the same as God. That was the debate in 312. Among the earliest Christians, there were those who did not think Jesus was God. The earliest Christians. But they were in the minority. So, under the pressure of the Nicene Council, under the pressure of the overlooking and the presiding emperor, a creed was hammered out. We believe X, Y, and Z. And Orthodox Christianity began. One might say Orthodox Christianity was born, but I say the true church died on that day. Those who did not conform, and there were many, were deposed from their churches and exiled and worse. That's why I call this year 325 CE, the year the church died at the Council of Nicaea. This forced orthodoxy held for over 1,000 years. Then in 1517, Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation, nailing his 95 theses of what was wrong with the church to the door at Wittenberg in Germany. But here's the problem. Every new reform movement ultimately wanted to become the new orthodoxy. So Luther left the Roman Catholic Church and started what would become the Lutheran Church as the Orthodox Church of Germany. And with every Protestant movement, a new but smaller orthodoxy was created. Anglicans in England, Presbyterians in Scotland, the Reformed Church in Switzerland, and so on and so on and so on. And then in each of these countries that set up their own orthodoxy, as they enforced their national orthodoxy with the power of the state. Understand, Queen Elizabeth just died, bless her soul. Queen Elizabeth is the head. The monarch of England, now King Charles III, is the head of the church, not the Archbishop of Canterbury. That's what Constantine did. He blended the authority of the state with the church, and that's what every orthodoxy has done ever since. So, in each of these many orthodoxies, for example, out of England came the Puritans, the Congregationalists, the Baptists, and the Methodists. But these could not be tolerated by the state church orthodoxies and the governments that enforced that orthodoxy. And so they were exiled and suppressed. And so it was that the Puritans and Congregationalists fled England to New England and established the 13 colonies, and you'll know that history. Now, you'll understand why I'm reviewing this. Almost all of the colonies set up and established state churches that were, again, the new orthodoxies in their own states. Congregationalists in Connecticut, Baptists in Rhode Island, Quakers in Pennsylvania, Reformed in New York, Anglican in Virginia, and so on. Each set up their own state orthodoxy. But after the Revolution, the 13 colonies, with their 13 state churches, wanted to form a single nation, the United States of America. And what they realized was that they could not and should not have a national church. And so the first thing they did after writing the Constitution was to amend it with the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This allowed religion to be free of government enforcement and to return to the original state of affairs where Christianity or whatever religion relied on attraction and not coercion. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, no relation, were adamant about this clause. That's why it was first. And they deemed it essential to the success of the fledgling nation. This understanding of the separation of church and state held for about 100 years. And mainline Protestant Christianity, Presbyterians, Anglicans, Methodists, Baptists, all those folk, flourished in the new country. But soon, a reactionary movement, not a reform movement, because each of those were reform movements in a way, a reactionary movement that was reacting to the appropriation by the mainline churches of the Enlightenment and all of its scientific advances, knowledge and understanding, historical understanding, and all of that were being incorporated and absorbed into the mainline churches. And the reactionary movement wanted to take the faith back to the fundamentals. This movement started to gain steam. They wanted to take the Christian churches back to what they considered the fundamentals of the faith. And they began to reestablish an orthodoxy which they would seek to impose upon the country. As this orthodoxy of fundamentalism gained steam, one of the leading liberal Protestant ministers of the day, the Reverend Harry Emerson Fosdick of Union Theological Seminary, preached a sermon asking the prescient question, Shall the fundamentalists win? He preached this sermon exactly 100 years ago, in May of 1922. And here we are in September of 2022, and I think we have the answer. Yes, the fundamentalists have won. And the most compelling evidence of their triumph is the recent decision by the Supreme Court ending what reproductive freedom had been available across the nation for women and persons who can become pregnant, and allowing the states to return to the patchwork of the 13 colonies that the founders knew would be a disaster, but they have allowed it to return to this patchwork of each state having different degrees of religious orthodoxy and religious freedom and freedom from religion. So in Indiana, a 14-year-old girl cannot access abortion care and has to go to Ohio, where it was legal at that time. And the motivation of the legislatures that are banning abortion care is overtly religious and in clear violation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. They are trying to assert a new orthodoxy across the nation. Now, though they have won, not all churches have to submit. The government has not yet begun to close nonconforming churches or arrest nonconforming clergy. That day may come if the 2024 election goes a different direction. I belong to a movement that is continuing in the tradition of those early, innovative, experimental communities that are trying to follow Jesus as best we can. We're more aligned with Arius, who was the main opponent to the Nicene Creed, who said Jesus was not God. We are in the tradition of Harry Emerson Fosdick, who asked the question that we're still hoping to answer differently. And we call our movement progressive Christianity. We do not teach that Jesus is the same as God, but was a human being whose intense sense of spirituality transformed him and those he encountered. We do not teach that God is a being that interferes with human history. God is not some big guy in the sky God, but is rather an idea that is best expressed both intellectually and existentially as love. In this regard, we have much more in common with members of this Sunday assembly than we do with most evangelical Christians today. Slide 4. Now, these are the 8 points of progressive Christianity. I only want to talk about 2 of them very briefly. And please know, these are not another creed. They are not a creed. I was on the board when we wrote them because we started off by saying, we don't believe this, and we don't believe that, and we don't believe this, and we don't believe that. And finally, after we convinced people we didn't believe all that fundamentalist Christianity was asserting was the only way to be Christian, people started to ask, well, then what do you teach? And we use the word teach, not believe, because to believe is to have settled on an answer. To teach is a process of learning and growing. So we needed to articulate, to describe the current and evolving expression of the movement at the moment. And that's what these are. And even these are dated. And that's why I'm going to rewrite right here in your presence points 3 and 6. See, we can do that. We can do that. So points 3 and 6 are critical to our connection as a progressive Christian movement and the Sunday Assembly movement. I'll be done in just a moment. The key thing we have in common is our interest in and commitment to community. But community is not a lightweight word, not to me. My interpretation of what community can do and what happens in community is vital. It's vital to the second point, and it is vital to our commitment to social justice. But first, community. We seek community. That's the third point. You can't quite read it from where you are. We seek community that is inclusive of all people, including but not limited to conventional Christians and questioning skeptics, believers, agnostics, and I would add atheists, all gender identities, including women, men, trans and cis, non-binary folk, and all sexual orientations, all races, all classes, all abilities. What this means to me is that a community like this, described in that point, and granted, these are aspirational. We strive for community. I mean, I look at you here today, and I would want to suggest you could do with a little more diversity. And I suggest that to my congregation at Pilgrim every week. We could do for a little more diversity up in Carlsbad. But this is our aspirational, but it has to be more than that. We have to strive for it. And so what this means to me is that community, a community like this, is not just a place to have coffee. This is where meaning making happens. But more than that, this is where humanity making happens. Let me illustrate what I mean with the last slide. Allow me to introduce you to one of the most beautiful human beings to ever walk the earth, Sidney Poitier. Isn't he fine? That's just a good-looking man. He grew up dirt poor in the Bahamas. No running water, no electricity. There's a documentary out about his life right now, and in that documentary he says, "The world I knew was quite simple. I never thought about what I looked like. I didn't know what a mirror was." Think about that. Best looking person on the planet, and he didn't even have a mirror. But he knew he was beautiful. He knew he was a beautiful human being because of the love he knew from his family and his community. He didn't need a mirror to tell him who he was. They told him who he was. And that's the power of community. Then he came to the United States and he said, "America began to say to me, 'You're not who you think you are.'" Poitier continued, "There was a habit in Hollywood of utilizing blacks in the most disrespectful ways, all of the subservient roles. And I said, I cannot play that." Next slide. Is there one more? That is the 5. Yeah, that's it. Our nation has an ugly history. Now, there's some people who don't want to look in the mirror of our history. And we need to hold up that mirror. Our nation has an ugly history. It has been Eurocentric and was founded on white supremacy and patriarchy. And it refused to acknowledge the humanity of anyone who did not fit that mold. It destroyed the humanity of people. It destroyed their humanity and subjected them to the oppressions and exploitations of a rapacious capitalist society that ironically recognizes corporations as people, but not some actual humans as people. So in this racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic, nativist society, we need alternative communities to reconstitute the humanity that is stripped from us each and every day. Each and every day that we walk outside and America tells you you're not who you think you are. We need communities like Sunday Assembly. We need communities like Pilgrim United Church of Christ to build back the humanity that our society and our culture strips away from us every single day. Now, those of us who do not fit the mold of the straight white man have found ways by forming subcultures that can affirm us as we are by collecting other like folk. So we have the black church that confers humanity on black folk. And you have the Metropolitan Church and the LGBTQ Center that confers humanity on the LGBTQ plus community. And on down the line. But to be fully human, we need to be part of a community that is full of humans. All kinds of humans. Because then, and only then, do we begin to glimpse the full possibilities of our humanity. And when we can see, seek, and achieve any of the possibilities of what we know to be human, then we will have arrived and achieved justice. As Professor Cornel West of Union Theological Seminary likes to say, justice is what love looks like in public. And tenderness is what love feels like in private. But that's another sermon. Because the fundamentalists, and this is the last paragraph, because the fundamentalists are winning, we must come together to make sure that a progressive community presence does not disappear from the scene. We too, at Pilgrim Church, want to live better, especially by becoming the people we want to be. And we can only become that person by engaging the diversity of humanity. I can't be a full human being if I only know people who are like me. We too want to help often and wonder more. And we wonder more by being connected to a diverse community, because then I can wonder about who the hell are you? And I can learn and grow from my experience of you and who you are and how you came to be and what your path has been. We know that progressive communities of all stripes are small and fading. We all took a body blow from the pandemic. And if we are to survive, and let alone to thrive, we have to look at ways to connect our communities and to put our differences aside so that we can become communities that make meaning out of the madness around us and make beautiful human beings out of the people who come to us. That's all I hope to accomplish. Thank you so much for listening.